I didn't retire to become a detective, but the neighborhood made it easy. In our HOA, suspicion is a sport. People time their dog walks like patrols, carry stainless steel water bottles like batons, and file complaints about invisible things. Noise after 10 that sounds suspiciously like a yawn, a wind chime that vibrates menacingly, a garden gnome whose expression suggests tax evasion. Me, I water the azaleas, read paperbacks with sun-faded covers, and mow on Thursdays because it annoys the lawn-obsessed colonel across the cul-de-sac who mows on Fridays for the joy of superiority. I'm not unkind, I'm organized retirement did not turn me into a soft pear slumping on a couch. It gave me the luxury of noticing, and the most dangerous thing a quiet man can do is notice patterns. A dropped habit here, a new one there. A pattern is just a confession waiting for a witness. My name is Arthur Hale. I spent 38 years as a facilities engineer for a hospital that smelled permanently of lemon cleaner and boiled vegetables. My superpower was making broken systems obey. I ordered time around gurneys and air ducts. When everyone else panicked, I labeled. I own label makers in 2 fonts. When I signed the retirement papers, my boss hugged me like a beloved grandfather and whispered, "Please don't take the key ring. The building will die." I kept 2 keys, my house and the gate to the small side yard no one ever visits except when a storm throws branches like darts. That side yard holds a strip of lawn 15 feet wide, 100 long that runs between my place and my neighbor's. It's where the property pins are tiny metal truths drunk men trip over when they cut corners. Enter my neighbor, Miss Magnolia Wright. Yes, miss. She introduces herself that way, the same way she says organic and artisan and heirloom every syllable of velvet rope. Magnolia is the kind of woman who can weaponize a sun hat. She moved in 2 years ago with a vintage truck that never hauled anything heavier than an aesthetic, and a boyfriend who was forever between incubators, which I learned is code for likes ideas more than income. The truck was robin egg blue. The boyfriend was not. Magnolia grows things. She calls them edibles, though her parties serve them on boards so curated they look like bouquets that regret themselves. She posts photos of arugula, like the Pentagon should study it. Her followers comment, "Garden witch," and "teach us your soil." I have nothing against arugula. It is lettuce that learned cursive. But I have a bone-deep suspicion of people who confuse dirt with destiny. Dirt is honest. Destiny rarely is. We were fine at first. Neighborly waves, shared weather grievances. She borrowed my hedge trimmer once and returned it wrapped in cotton linen with a sprig of rosemary tied to the handle like a hostage note. I thanked her and disinfected the blade. I do not trust herbs as accomplices. It started with a lemon tree. "Arthur," she called over the fence one Saturday, voice floating on the kind of confidence you only get from podcasts. "Do you ever use this strip?" She meant the side yard, the long forgettable corridor of grass between our properties, where rain gutters empty and worms convene to discuss mud. I looked up from my clippers. She was balancing on a terracotta stepping stone, like a ballerina who just discovered clay. On her hat was a bee-pin the size of a small aircraft. "I use it to walk to the back," I said, "and to frown at the downspout when it misbehaves. Because," she went on brightly, "the sun cuts through here perfectly. I mean perfectly. And the HOA will love an edible corridor. It's community forward." I raised an eyebrow. The HOA loves 3 things: dues on time, fences at approved heights, and pretending community forward was their idea. "It's my strip," I said gently. "I like it plain." She smiled like I'd told a charming joke about boundaries. "Of course," she said. "Just brainstorming." "You're so practical." "It's inspiring." My wife used to call me practical too, right before she insisted on adopting another rescue cat that was actually a jowly lieutenant with opinions. We had a good run, my wife and I. She's gone 8 years now. Sometimes when the wind moves wrong, it still carries the ghost of her perfume through the hallway. I keep her garden gloves in a Ziploc. I am practical about grief. It needs containerization. The next week, a lemon sapling appeared on her side, just beyond the property line, close enough to tempt sunlight from my side, like a matinee idol leaning over the velvet rope. She didn't ask. I didn't mention it. We did what suburban neighbors do, a silent barter with God. I'll ignore that if you ignore this. A truce of nods over recycling bins. But then the sapling multiplied. Lemons begat lavender. Lavender begat raised beds. Raised beds begat compost, which begat a smell that spoke fluent biography. I'm a patient man. I let it happen the way I let the colonel mow corners with military precision. I refuse to admire. Patience is not weakness. It's an escrow account. In May, Magnolia hosted a garden party with strings of Edison bulbs and cocktails named after seasons. The HOA president, a man whose handshake feels like a policy, attended in a Panama hat he bought to signify open-mindedness. I observed from my porch, sipping iced tea like a witness for the prosecution. I am not unfriendly. I am an audience member who knows when the play has a twist, because here's the thing about patterns, they crescendo. By June, the strip had acquired a path. Flagstones cut diagonally across the grass, my grass like a quiet rebellion. I measured. 2 stones had slipped 6 inches into my side. 6 inches in civilian parlance is an accident. In HOA language, it's a manifesto. I took a photo with a tape measure and the day's newspaper for scale, the way kidnappers prove sincerity. When Magnolia saw me, she waved her trowel like a conductor. "Arthur, I was just about to come over." "About the stones?" I asked. She tilted her head. "Oh, those?" "It's just practical. It keeps the mud down. And the vibe is phenomenal." "Vibe," I repeated. "Is that in the bylaws?" "It's implied," she said, "which is not how laws work." "I'll pull the stones back to your side," I said. "No harm done." Her smile stiffened by a molecule. "You could just leave them," she suggested. The sun pattern is a shared resource. Shared resource is a phrase you use right before you go shopping in someone else's wallet. I didn't argue. I fetched my garden spade, moved the stones 6 inches west, tamped the soil with the reverence of a judge stamping denied, and went back to my azaleas. Magnolia watched me with the bright, brittle attention of someone who believes the universe owes her complicity. 2 days later, the stones had drifted back. 6 inches east. There's a word for people who move things that aren't theirs because it makes their aesthetic feel resolved. The polite word is curator. The accurate word is thief. I didn't move them again. I took a second photo. I opened a folder on my computer titled Botany Creep. I dated it. I exhaled. Then came the fence. It was a Tuesday because betrayals prefer weekdays. Magnolia knocked at 7:05 a.m., which in a suburban HOA is the exact minute you're legally allowed to behave like a leaf blower. "Arthur," she chirped, dressed in overalls so crisp they still remembered the store. Such a perfect morning. "Listen, I'm having a contractor put in a small decorative fence. Split rail, rustic, sustainable pine. It'll frame the garden so beautifully." "On your side," I said. "Totally," she sang. "Just hugging the path." I looked at the lemon tree leaning toward my airspace like an extrovert at a quiet party. "Paths do tend to wander," I said. "You're so funny," she said, which is what people call you when they don't want to admit you're correct. At Nine Sire, a truck arrived with 2 men who looked like they had survived 3 hurricanes and a divorce. They were polite in the way professionals are, when they recognize a neighbor who will measure things. I brought them lemonade. It seemed thematically appropriate. "You boys have the survey." I asked conversationally. "Property pins?" The taller one tapped his tablet. "We work off homeowner marks unless there's a conflict." I nodded. "Homeowner marks." The poetry of error. "There's always a conflict," I said gently, and pointed to where the metal pin peeks up like a silver eyelash in the grass. "That's 60 inches from my lot line." "Mag said it's here," he replied, pointing 6 inches east of the pin. The number 6 again. "Her favorite trespass, Mags," I repeated, as if tasting a new spice. "And did Mags show you the recorded plat or just the vibe?" He chuckled despite himself. "Just the vibe." "Well," I said, "vibes don't hold up in court." He shrugged, gratitude flickering. "We set posts where she flags. If the HOA signs off, we're out of it." "Of course," I said. "Do your job." I went inside and pulled my file box. I am the type of man who files warranties by appliance name and date of installation. My spice drawer is alphabetized. I have a laminated card that explains my laminated cards. The recorded plat map lived in a sleeve labeled Arthur and June Ridgeview, recorded plat plus survey keep. I printed 2 copies and slid one into a transparent folder I keep for conversations that require daylight. By noon, the posts were set 5 of them, marching in a jaunty little line that shaved 13 inches off my side yard for 100 feet. 13 inches stolen with a smile is still theft. Magnolia posed for a photo with the crew. captioned it "Framing the Dream." "Regenerative community garden, good neighbors," and tilted her head against a post like it was already famous. "Arthur," she called, "come see. Isn't it lovely?" It's so orderly now. Her order is my chaos, I thought. But I walked over with the plat like a man bringing truth to a bake sale. "Miss Magnolia," I said politely, "your fence is on my property." Her smile didn't waver. It thickened, like frosting refusing to accept gravity. "Oh, Arthur, it's barely a foot." "A foot is as illegal as a mile," I said. "The law does not use a ruler with feelings." She laughed, genuinely now, because she thought I was being quaint. "Look," she said, tapping one post. "Cat's just here to guide the eye. Where it looks isn't the issue," I said. "Where it is, that's the issue." Her face did a small calculation, the kind people do when the word no threatens to leak into their garden. "We can file an encroachment agreement," she offered airily. "You know, shared usage. The HOA will adore the precedent." "I don't do encroachment agreements involving my property," I said. "I do property lines involving my property." "Arthur," she said, and now the sugar melted off the apple. "Don't be stubborn. This is community forward. You don't even use this space." I looked down the long, thin lawn strip that exists precisely because someone once pounded a pin and said this much and no further. "I use it to mark where my life ends and yours begins," I said. "I use it to sleep at night." She softened again, which is to say she recalibrated her strategy. "Oh, Arthur," she cooed, "you men and your lines." You know what I think? Our culture fetishizes ownership when we should be talking stewardship. "Our culture can talk," I said. "My fence can't move." She rolled her eyes an eye roll that had attended good schools. "You're making this ugly." "No," I said, and smiled kindly so she'd miss the knife in it. "I prefer to make it official." I excused myself and called the HOA office. Our HOA manager, Brenda, has the voice of a woman who could knock a souffle into shape with a look. She answers in 2 rings and pronounces last names like charges. "Ridgeview HOA," she said. "Brenda speaking." "Brenda, it's Arthur Hale, lot." 17, Mr. Hale," she replied warmly. "Your azaleas are, as always, in compliance." "High praise," I said. "Question about a fence installation on the lot line between 17 and 18. Posts are currently set over the recorded boundary by roughly a foot. The homeowner suggests it's community forward. I prefer platted boundary." Brenda exhaled the way a violin does when it's tuned properly. "Do you have photographs?" "Multiple," I said, "with measuring tape and today's paper. Would you like the recorded plat?" "I would like it laminated," she said, and I loved her a little for that. "Give me an hour." Magnolia watched me from her porch, smiling like a pageant winner in front of a sinkhole. I waved. "I am not rude." "I am a metronome." While my printer warmed up, I made tea. I used my wife June's cup, the one with a chip that looks like Idaho. I sat at the kitchen table and arranged the plat. The photos, the survey stake locations, and a note I wrote in a tidy teacher's hand. Neighbor's fence post set 13-14 inches over recorded line along entire run. See photos AF, pins located and flagged. Then I signed my name like a person who knows how ink works. At 2, I slid the packet into a transparent folder and walked to the HOA office at the clubhouse. Magnolia's contractor had paused. The taller one met my eye with a look that said, "I prefer checks to courtrooms. Contractors understand gravity better than anyone. It's how they keep their faces calm when homeowners play frisbee with facts." Brenda took my file like a nurse receiving a newborn. "We'll issue a stop order pending an inspection," she said. "Thank you for your documentation." "Pleasure," I said. "It's what I do when I'm not alphabetizing spice." She looked at me over her glasses. "Is that a joke?" "In the sense that it's true," I said. By 3, a bright white stop-work notice laminated like a prayer sprouted on Magnolia's post like a hosta with standards. The contractors packed up without theatrics. Magnolia removed the notice, photographed it, and posted it to her followers with a caption about gatekeeping and legacy power. I watered my lawn. At 4, she came to my porch, knocked like a metronome 3 even taps, and stood with a smile sharpened into something professional. "Arthur," she said, "let's be adults." "I was born an old man," I said. "It's my core competency," she ignored that. "This is a misunderstanding," she went on. "We'll sign an encroachment agreement. You'll get a small stipend for the use of land, and I'll manage the space. I can offer you a produce share." I pictured Kale arriving at my door like a subscription to smugness. "No, thank you." "You'd prefer nothing?" She laughed, incredulous. "To a dozen eggs from hens who practice consent?" "I'd prefer the law," I said pleasantly. She leaned forward, smile knife clean. "You know what your problem is, Arthur. You confuse compliance with goodness. They're not the same. Compliance keeps my house mine," I said. "Goodness keeps me from saying what I think of that hat." She touched her brim reflexively. "You're being petty." "That was mercy," I said, and my smile never moved. She sighed dramatically. Somewhere a stage director applauded. "Fine," she said. "We'll handle it formally." "I look forward to it," I said, and meant it the way a chess player means thank you for moving your queen there. That night I pulled down a shoebox labeled Surveys Deeds Oddities. In it were the original closing documents from 1994, the survey stakes positions, and a Polaroid of June in overalls, straddling the property pin with a grin that said she was prepared to argue with heaven. I placed the Polaroid on my nightstand. The pin had not moved. People had. Over the next week, the fence posts stood like sore thumbs while Magnolia conducted a campaign. She hosted a community circle about reimagining borders. A half-dozen neighbors attended, drawn by lemonade and the thrill of talking policy without reading any. I wandered over with a folding chair and the recorded plat under my arm like a hymn book. "We're talking stewardship," Magnolia announced. "How can we share sunlight, soil, and joy? How do we resist scarcity mindsets?" "By not stealing," I offered cheerfully, and set my chair beside the lemonade. She laughed tightly. "Arthur's being cheeky. He's our resident logistics czar." "I prefer owner," I said. 3 letters shorter. A realtor neighbor named Skylar, of course, chimed in. "Lot lines are fluid these days. Buyers want community." "Lot lines are iron," I said. "Pins are made of it." Skylar patted my arm with a smile that had sold many kitchens. "We need to evolve, Arthur." "I evolved into a man who reads," I said, and opened the plat. "There are moments when paper is more powerful than persuasion." This was one. Half the circle leaned forward. Curious how the trick worked. I pointed out the pins, the dimensions, the dotted line that wasn't dotted from sentiment, but the surveyor's pen. "This is the neighborhood as it actually exists," I said. "Everything else is garnish." Magnolia reclaimed the room with a flourish. "Okay, feelings are valid. The fence is decorative. The path is welcoming. Arthur and I will sort the details." By details, she meant consequences. I prefer my words honest. 2 days later, a notice appeared on the HOA portal. Lot line verification. Lots 17 and 18, Friday, 10 a.m. The board would attend. An independent surveyor would be present. Owners welcome. In HOA terms, this is the Super Bowl. There would be lawn chairs. There would be clipboards. There would be Brenda, who was not a woman so much as a consequence in a blouse. I prepared like a man who has been preparing his whole life without knowing it was rehearsal. I printed every photo. The flagstones migrating like geese. The tape measure kissing the post. The contractor's truck with date visible on the door magnet. I flagged the pins with bright orange ribbon and placed small laminated cards beside them. Recorded pin do not disturb old habits die laminated. I trimmed the side yard until the grass was a green laser level. I set 2 folding chairs under the maple, one for me, one for June's memory, and placed a cooler between them in case anyone civilized wanted iced tea and a lesson. At 9:59, the surveyor arrived. He was the only man I've ever seen who pulled more authority from a tripod than a judge does from a robe. He introduced himself as Dev. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, boots, and the polite incredulity of a person who sets the world straight for money. "Morning," he said to me, eyes taking me in my folder, my ribbons, my neat lawn like a runway for truth. "You hail?" "Yes," I said. "This is my side." That I nodded down the strip. "Is the scene of the alleged vibe." He chuckled, and I liked him immediately. At 10:05, Brenda arrived with 2 board members who wore their lanyards like swords. The colonel also arrived, out of uniform but not out of attitude. Skylar leaned on a Prius and Liv texted. People love governance when it happens outside. At 10:08, Magnolia made her entrance in a white linen jumpsuit of the sort that makes most people look foolish, but made her look like a mission statement. She carried a canvas tote that said "Small Farms, Big Feelings." The tote did not appear ironic. "Good morning." She sang as if it were a stage and the chorus owed her its joy. I brought scones. Brenda did not like scones. Brenda liked terms. "We'll begin," she said crisply. "Surveyor, please confirm recorded pin positions." Dev nodded. He set his tripod over the first pin, with a tenderness I recognized the way men place objects that make the day make sense. He checked his instrument, sighted down the line, and walked. His assistant jogged to the backyard, measured, called out numbers. Dev called them back like a prayer meeting. Brenda turned to Magnolia. "Miss Wright, your fence posts appear to be set approximately 13 to 14 inches over the recorded line." Magnolia smiled, the kind of smile you aim at a toddler with a lemonade stand and no permit. "We're discussing a shared micro-commons," she said. "The line is theoretical." Dev tapped the tripod. "The line is not theoretical," he said pleasantly. "It's recorded. It's under my boot." "But surely," Magnolia persisted, "with climate realities and shifting needs." "The bedrock hasn't succumbed to climate realities," Dev said. "It's where it was when your lots were carved out of prairie and promise." I almost applauded. Instead, I inhaled the smell of cut grass and the faint citrus from her wandering lemon. I let the moment stretch like a rubber band you know is about to snap in a satisfying sting. Brenda held up the HOA's printed guidelines. Section 4.23, all fences must be erected wholly within the lot lines of the property upon which they are located. There is no exception for micro-commons. Magnolia listened with the injured kindness of a yoga teacher denied a studio window. "Arthur," she said, pivoting to me for the save, "we can fix this without making it a thing. You donate a sliver. I do the work. We invite the neighborhood to an open harvest. It becomes a case study." "I prefer cases closed," I said, not unkindly. "This is about vision," she insisted, color brightening in her cheeks. "This is about land," I said, tapping the plat. "Vision has to rent space here like the rest of us." Silence settled. The kind of silence that signals decision. Brenda looked at Dev. "Please mark the fence line with offset stakes," she said. "The posts must be removed within 72 hours and the ground restored. If they are not, the HOA will contract removal and bill Lot 18 accordingly. A fine will follow under Section 9.1. It was done not with shouting or righteous speeches, but with a man and a tripod, a woman with a binder, and an old guy in a baseball cap who kept receipts. Drama belongs to those who lack documentation." Magnolia's smile collapsed for a heartbeat before she rebuilt it with different materials. "Of course," she said lightly, as if she had advocated this result. "We'll adjust. We love adjustment." But then, because this is how these stories always go, she tried one last pivot. "What about the path stones?" she asked sweetly. "They're shared friendly, and they're barely over the line." "The stones aren't on the agenda," Brenda said. "They're on his property," I said. "That's always the agenda," Dev shrugged. "They're 6 inches over, give or take. Not my jurisdiction unless someone pays me to say it again in bolder font." "I'll pay you," I said. And that, right there, is where Magnolia made the fatal error that turns a garden story into a property lesson. She waved her hand like she was swatting a fly that had paid HOA dues. "Oh, let him have his inches," she said, finally exasperated. "It's not like he's using them. You learn a lot about a person when they think inches don't matter. Ask any surgeon, or any man with a strip of land and a wife's Polaroid on his nightstand." I smiled the way my wife used to when she knew something I didn't yet. "I use every inch," I said. "To sleep." Dev pulled the offset stakes fluorescent orange into the ground like exclamation points. The colonel muttered, "Good show," as if this had been a skirmish polished to his standards. Skylar typed furiously and captured the moment in a photo that would later be captioned, "Process Drama." Magnolia lifted the tote, looked right at me with an odd softness and said, "You know, Arthur, you're very good at endings." "I prefer beginnings," I said. "Endings write themselves when you begin with the truth." Everyone drifted, as neighborhood flocks do after excitement feeds and disperses. The scones remained untouched. Brenda handed one to Dev out of politeness to carbohydrates. He accepted it like evidence. "And then it was just me." And the long green strip 13 reclaimed inches, glinting in the afternoon like a quiet sword. I carried my chair back to the porch and sat. The lemon's leaves trembled as if reconsidering allegiance. The posts stood there guilty, like guests who overstayed the story. I poured iced tea, held June's cup in my hands and let the condensation ring the table like a stamp. Here is what I knew, sitting there. She would not stop. People who call lines theoretical are not calmed by tripods or language. She would try another angle, something administrative or emotional, performative or legal-ish. Perhaps a pilot program for edible verge gardens, backed by 2 board members seduced by the word pilot. Or perhaps a sudden burst of charm and muffins delivered with a suggestion that men like me should die in the company of rosemary. I also knew this. I wasn't angry. Anger is a wind that tires itself on unworthy sails. I was entertained. A system is only as strong as its weakest assumption, and Magnolia's weakest assumption was that a quiet man interprets silence as surrender, not me. I interpret silence as setup, so I washed the tea glass, fed the neighbor's cat, he considers me emotionally available, and went to my desk. I opened a new folder on my desktop, right encroachment, garden, fence path. I typed a list with my old engineer's neat brutality. Photos stones drift AF. 2 fence posts over line, devs offsets. 3 HOA stop order copy, point 4. Survey recorded plat and pin map. 5. Timeline initial ask sapling path fence inspection. 6. Compliance clock. 72 HR's removal ends. Sunday 4 p.m. 7. If non-compliant, document, notify, escalate per section 9.18. Garden claims micro commons, shared resource. 9. Public posture, stewardship, community forward. 10. Bank a joke for later. The joke wrote itself, she called it a garden. I called it evidence. It made me chuckle, a quiet thing that felt like victory stretching before it runs. I printed the list and slid it under a magnet on the fridge shaped like Idaho. We have an Idaho motif. Long story. Then I did what proper villains and saints both do when the first act ends. I slept. Flat, decent, the way a man sleeps whose tools are clean and whose photos are time-stamped. At dawn, I walked the strip again. The grass had that morning coolness that makes you forgive July. Dew beaded along the edges of the path stones, like tiny witnesses aligning for roll call. I crouched, touched one bead, watched it tremble and fall onto my soil. Inches matter. Drops do too. Across the way, a light flicked on in Magnolia's kitchen. I pictured her in linen, making artisanal coffee, plotting a press release to her followers about the tyranny of plats. I wished her well. Truly. Life is hard when the earth refuses to collaborate with your brand. At 9, the contractors returned to remove the posts. I brought them donuts. Men who do the right thing under instruction deserve pastry. The taller one tipped his cap. Sorry for the mess, sir. You didn't make it, I said. You're just sweeping up after a vibe. He laughed and loaded the last post. The ground pocked with 5 regrets. I tamped the soil smooth with a flat spade, my hands remembering hospital floors and patient rooms where, after some chaos, I restored the hum of normal. The hum of normal is underrated. It's the sound of a place obeying its design. By noon, the fence was gone. The pathstones remained still 6 inches over, and I could feel the story looking for its next chapter, like a river looking for the lowest point. I didn't have to look far to find it. At 1, the HOA portal chimed with a document. Fall exterior inspection, Zone B, Septum 12. That was our zone. That was our date, and I saw it as if I was already standing there. Magnolia's garden staged like an audition, her path boldly welcoming, her lemon leaning like gossip, and an inspector with a clipboard walking the line, eyes calibrated to non-compliance like a bird of prey to twitching. Inspection day isn't for amateurs. It's for archivists. It's where a patient man wins. Without raising his voice, I made a fresh list. Confirm pins with dev request temp string line day of Mo strip. Morning of inspection edge along string document. Pathstones crossing line fresh photos. W1 date download HOA rules. Section on hardscape encroachments prepare. Iced tea again, inspectors are human. Where hat June liked for luck bring. 1 extra chair for the lemon tree. In spirit, I put the list beside the first and felt the satisfaction of a sequence coming to life. Revenge, justice, whatever word you prefer isn't fireworks. It's a calendar. It's patience with teeth. I went inside and called Brenda. Quick procedural question, I said. On inspection day, is the inspector empowered to write a direct notice on non-fence hardscape encroachment? Indeed, she said. Stones, beds, edging all must be within the lot line. Why, no reason, I said, smiling at no one. Just aligning my morning. When I hung up, the house felt like a ship righted. I walked to the bedroom, picked up the Polaroid of June by the pin and stood it on the dresser. You'd have loved this, I told her. It's a bake sale with bylaws. If the HOA is a machine, I know where the gears are. If Magnolia is a gardener, I know where her roots are shallow. I'm not cruel. I'm an engineer with a lawn. Inspection day was a week away. Plenty of time for her to try something cute. But I had the one thing she didn't, a quiet calendar, and the discipline to let the clock do half my speaking. I stepped back out, stood on the reclaim, and let 13 inches of afternoon sun warm my shoes. Some men measure their lives in trophies, others in scars. Me? In inches I kept, fair and square, when the world tried to tell me I wasn't using them. Inspection day arrived like a punctual guest 5 minutes early and ready to judge the hors d'oeuvres. I woke at 6, brewed coffee strong enough to apologize for all the coffee that came before it, and walked the strip. The dew was theatrical. It beaded along the grass blade edges like rhinestones on a showgirl, which I took as a good omen. I set my hat, the one June said made me look dangerously municipal, on my head, and unfolded the checklist I'd taped to the fridge under the Idaho magnet. Engineers trust lists the way sailors trust stars. Confirm pins with dev temp string line day off edge, and mow along string photos with date time stamps print, section 4.2.3 and 7.1.5. Hardscape encroachments. Water runoff prepare iced tea inspectors. Our human extra chair for the lemon in Spirit 8730. I texted Dev. You still game for a cameo? He wrote back with a thumbs up and the words, tripod itching. I could kiss that man's boots, practically did last week. By 8, I'd edged the grass along the recorded line so clean it looked like the neighborhood barber had switched to turf. I ran a taut white mason string between offset stakes Dev had left purely demonstrative, not argumentative, and the strip transformed into a diagram. That's all property disputes are anyway, human feelings begging to be diagrams. At 8:15 I noticed Magnolia's kitchen light switch on. A silhouette crossed the window, wide-brimmed hat, linen silhouette tote bag that could carry either scones or affidavits. In my experience, you can tell the day a person plans to lie by how carefully they dress. She was immaculate. Linen whispers when it plans to talk over you. At 9, I wheeled a cooler to the shade and set out 2 chairs, one for me, one empty for June. I like the way an empty chair reminds me not to fill every silence. Across the strip, the lemon tree leaned as if eavesdropping. At 9:10, Brenda's email hit the portal. Exterior inspection Zone B will begin on Maple Lane at 10 Way. Please have your exterior areas accessible. The colonel replied, flagging mailbox for paint chip. He paints his mailbox like a battleship. People. Saluted by accident. At 9:20, a new post appeared on Magnolia's feed. A sunlit photo of her raised beds captioned, Today we welcome the HOA to witness community care in action. Land is a teacher, not a prison. Reimagine stewardship. 53 hearts in 10 minutes. The algorithm loves a preamble. At 9:30, Dev's pickup swung to the curb as reliable as a calendar. He climbed out with his tripod, like a man carrying a flag to reclaim something that had never been lost. We nodded like men who had already shared a joke because we had. Morning, Hale, he said. Morning, Dev, I said. The vibe is resting comfortably. He grinned. Let's make sure it stays on its side of the bed. He set the tripod over the front pin, twitched, sighted, and dropped a temporary line using a pair of neon whisker stakes that looked like festive exclamation points. The white string traced the boundary as gently as a violin bow. On my side, grass trimmed like a textbook illustration. On hers, plants pleaded their case, and pathstones tried to play diplomat by occupying multiple jurisdictions at once. I took 3 photos in 7 seconds, each with the day's paper in frame. Somewhere in a small corner of my soul, a tiny clerk stamped something received. At 9:55, the HOA inspector, Mr. Ramos, pulled up in a beige sedan that emitted an aura of steadiness. He wore a shirt the exact color of forms that end arguments, clipboard, sunglasses, comfortable shoes. He nodded at Dev, nodded at me, nodded at the lemon, which I liked. Professionals acknowledge even the inanimate when it's going to have a moment. Brenda arrived with 2 board members and a folding binder that, if opened suddenly, could decapitate a lie. The colonel stationed himself at a viewing distance, armed with a pen and the righteousness of a man who knows the HOA's middle name. At 10 on the dot, Magnolia emerged like a press conference. White linen jumpsuit, hair arranged to imply both ease and effort, tote bag reading small farms, big feelings. She smiled like she was about to pardon a turkey. "Good morning, everyone," she called, tone pitched for a microphone no one had provided. "Welcome to our shared learning. I've prepared muffins gluten-free, apology-free, and a short statement." Brenda did not flinch. "We'll be moving lot to lot. We're here to observe and note. You may direct any comments to the inspector." "Of course," Magnolia purred, and then directed all comments to the air. "Which is the influencer's true audience?" Ramos began on the far end, methodical as a metronome. Downspouts, siding, paint eaves. He walked the list like a rosary, murmuring not prayers but numbers. When he reached the strip, he stopped and looked at the string, at the stones kissing the string like teenagers, trying to misinterpret a curfew. "Property line," he asked Dev. "Recorded," Dev said. "String indicates center line between pins." Ramos nodded, bent, and ran a small measuring wheel along the stones. 6-inch encroachment at most stones, he said. Some 8. Consistent pattern. They drifted, Magnolia said cheerfully, as if describing a cloud. "We had some voles. They prefer whimsical arrangements." Ramos, who had the face of a man who had met every vole in municipal service, did not smile. "Hardscape cannot drift over a lot line," he said. He spoke in declaratives, not apologies. "Edging, stones, beds must be entirely within owner's lot. Section 4.23, subsection C. No encroachment." Magnolia tilted her head. "We're piloting a micro-commons path to pilot programs require board vote and written policy," Brenda said without consulting her binder. "None exists." "Then perhaps we can do that today," Magnolia said brightly. "We have quorum." "We do not conduct policy votes at inspections," Brenda replied. She could butter toast with that tone and have the toast thank her for the privilege. Ramos took out a yellow tag and wrote with the slow calm of a man writing the weather. "Notice. Remove all stones and edging 6 inches over recorded line. Restore grade within 10 days. Follow-up inspection scheduled. Failure to comply may result in fines per section 9.1. He affixed it to a stake with a satisfying rip. Magnolia's smile grew teeth, then lost them, then found a new set. She pivoted. "And the lemon?" she asked sweetly, placing a palm on its trunk like a defense attorney, touching the shoulder of a very photogenic defendant. "It leans because it wants the light." "Are we really punishing a tree for sunlight?" "No," Ramos said. "We're reading a map. It's," she searched for it, "aspirationally present. The trunk is on your side," Ramos conceded. He stepped to the line and used a small plumb bob, bless him, to read the canopy. "Canopy crosses line by 20 inches. Section 7.1.5 requires trees not overhang neighboring lots in a way that drops leaf litter or fruit. Adjacent owner may demand trimming at their expense or yours." I raised a hand like a polite student. "Adjacent owner demands future lemons be trimmed to the line," I said mildly. "Not for now." But before winter drop, Ramos made a note. "Mutual agreement recorded." "It's a Lisbon lemon," Magnolia interjected, as if the cultivar might trigger diplomatic immunity. "Lisbon still obeys Lisbon's property lines," I said, and handed Ramos a printed copy of Section 7.15. He took it, nodded once, and tucked it into his clipboard like a secret handshake. Magnolia sought higher ground. "Arthur," she said, smiling directly at me now, voice lowering into intimacy, a favorite tactic of people who believe tone cancels facts. "We could have done this quietly." "We are doing it quietly," I said. "There's a string. That's the opposite of a megaphone." "You love rules more than you love neighbors," she said, voice dipped in honey and sharpened with clove. "I love both," I said. "Rules are how neighbors stay neighbors." Ramos cleared his throat with bureaucratic mercy. "We'll continue," he said, and made 3 more notes that will someday be read aloud to a board while cookies go stale. We moved to the back. That's where the day surprised even me. "Inlet here?" Ramos asked, pointing to a new length of black corrugated pipe running under Magnolia's beds toward the strip. It surfaced in a discreet pop-up emitter that sat exactly 2 inches over my line. Water, like ambition, takes the shortest path downhill. She brightened. "French drain," she said, delighted to have the answer. "We installed it last week. We manage runoff responsibly." It's community-minded. Does it discharge onto adjacent property? Ramos asked, neutral but in the way a prosecutor asks if today is Tuesday when he already has the calendar in evidence. The better question is, does it nourish pollinators? She chirped. Section 7.1.5, Ramos said, tapping the paper I'd just given him, prohibits directing water onto neighboring lots. Discharge must remain on originating lot or into approved stormwater system. He bent, clicked open the emitter and peered. Wet earth. The scent rose. It smelled like a technicality blooming. Recent discharge, he noted. I didn't smile. I adjusted my hat to keep the sun out of my eyes and said nothing. June once told me the difference between pettiness and precision is whether you gloat. I try not to gloat when lemon trees are listening. Ramos wrote another notice, same yellow, same tone of weather. Notice, remove or redirect drainage element to remain within lot. Stop discharge onto adjacent lot. 10 days. Magnolia lost a degree of linen composure. This is harassment, she said, but the sentence trembled the way a fence does when it discovers the wind has a lawyer. It's hydrology, Ramos said, and I fell a little in love with the man's vocabulary. Dev, hatted saint of string, cleared his throat. If you want to keep the drain, Miss Wright, he offered with tradesman mercy, you can daylight it to a dry well on your side. It'll never know the difference, she blinked. She didn't like solutions she hadn't invented. I'll consult my permaculture mentor, she said. Consult the plat, I suggested, and took another photo. Date, time. The wet lip of the emitter glistening like a confession. We finished the circuit 2 minor dings for her exposed compost bin. Unauthorized banner that read, Herbs have rights. A clean slate for me. Fresh paint on the soffits and hedge exactly at compliance height. I trimmed it with a ruler like a lunatic. Brenda signed the form. Ramos signed the form. Dev struck the string like a man folding a flag, and the show dispersed. Magnolia didn't disperse. She walked to my cooler, opened it, took an iced tea without asking, small encroachments reveal large ones, and stood a measured distance from my chair. You're good, she said. It wasn't compliment. It was diagnosis. You've converted your loneliness into mastery. I like quiet, I said, and sipped my tea. And I like that you think it's loneliness. You could have come to a garden circle, she said. You could have learned something about sharing. I learned something about sharing when the fence posts kissed my grass, I said. I learned I didn't like it. She tipped her head back, studied the canopy sky as if asking God for a line-item veto. I'll appeal, she said. I'm connected. So is the drain, I said pleasantly. That's the problem. She smirked despite herself. Do you ever get tired of the little zingers? She asked. Not yet, I said. But I'm retired. I have time to develop others. We let the moment sit. Across the way, the colonel polished his mailbox flag with a cloth he keeps in his pocket for emergencies of shine. Somewhere a dog barked the names of the last 8 mail carriers in chronological order. What do you want, Arthur? She asked finally. Really want? Exactly what I asked for the first day you floated the idea, I said. My line, my inches, my sleep. You'll get them, she said, but the sentence felt like a threat to the universe, not a promise to me. She turned and left, linen whispering verdicts at her ankles. I watched the lemon leaves tremble. I patted the empty chair. She'll try one more time, I told June. Maybe 2. People like this do not go quietly to compliance. They go live. I was right within the hour. At 11:30, a special notice popped into my inbox from the association. Emergency Agenda Addition Proposal, Edible Verge Pilot, Discussion Only. Magnolia had persuaded 2 board members to call a lunchtime discussion, counting on fatigue and muffins to lubricate policy. The meeting would be at 12:30 in the clubhouse. Public welcome. I laughed so loud the colonel turned to see if Russia had landed. I printed my packet 1 page. Bullet points, big font. Pilot programs require notice. Draft policy, insurance review, section 10.4. Verge gardens redefine maintenance liability. Require indemnity. Encroachment cannot be solved by changing language after the fact. Stormwater. No discharge onto adjacent lots, 7.1.5. Case study. Fence posts already removed. Path stones tagged. Drain sited. Proposal. Create a committee to review after non-compliance is cured. At 12:25, I took my hat, my paper, and my patience to the clubhouse. The room smelled like coffee and recent arguments. Brenda sat at the front with the set of a woman who had been asked to chair a circus. 2 board members flanked her, both wearing expressions I call compelled optimism. Magnolia sat in the front row with muffins and a tote that suggested revolutions can be carried by hand. 10 neighbors dotted the chairs, including Skylar, phone ready, the Colonel, pen ready, and Mrs. Moreno, who blesses every meeting by knitting something that could be a scarf or a treaty, depending on length. Brenda opened crisply. "We are here to hear a concept. No vote will be taken today. The board's bandwidth is not a trampoline." Magnolia stood, beamed, and unfurled a trifold board with a printed title, Edible Verge Pilot, A Pathway to Community. Photos, happy children holding lettuce like diplomas, bees looking employed. A pathstone not currently under indictment. She flowed. I will give her that. She spoke with cadence, with diagrams of imaginary liability waivers, with hashtags that somehow felt like footnotes. "When we share," she said, "scarcity becomes story, not reality." I raised my hand when she paused for applause. It arrived late and wearing hesitation. Brenda nodded to me. "Mr. Hale." I stood and kept my paper visible. I spoke in the warm tone of a neighbor who brings casseroles and citations. "I love lettuce," I began. "I truly do. It has fed me through 3 marriages in this neighborhood, 2 divorces I witnessed, and my own long, excellent one until the universe decided she'd cooked enough. I have no beef with arugula and only some with kale." That earned a democratic chuckle. "But," I continued, "we do not legislate around a single neighbor's vibe. Pilot programs require process. That's not cruelty. That's how we keep lawsuits off the minutes." I lifted my bullet sheet. "If you redefine verge use, you redefine maintenance liability, trip hazards, ADA access, stormwater, pest control, and this is my personal favorite responsibility. If a path crosses a line today because it's cute, a car will cross a rule tomorrow because it's convenient. I don't say that to be mean. I say it because it's a pattern. And I am very good with patterns," the Colonel murmured. "Hear, hear," like a musket had quietly gone off. I pointed gently to my second bullet. "Stormwater cannot be discharged onto adjacent lots. That's a law, not a lifestyle choice. Today a French drain kisses my grass. Tomorrow it kisses the insurance clause. If you want to change verge policy, form a committee. Write a draft. Ask the insurer about premiums. Present at a properly noticed meeting. I will read every word because I am fun at parties." Laughter. Brenda's mouth did that small V again. Magnolia's didn't. I finished with kindness, I meant. Fix the encroachments first. Heal the inches. Then talk about carrots. Brenda thanked me in the dignified tone she reserves for sentences that reduce meetings by 40 minutes. One board member, a man with the expression of a beagle who just found his leash, said, "Insurance review seems important." The other nodded like a bobblehead at a reasonable sermon. Magnolia countered with a flourish. "We cannot be held hostage by one man's fear of sharing." I shook my head. "I'm not afraid of sharing," I said. "I'm afraid of rewriting property lines with muffins." Mrs. Moreno's knitting needles paused, then clicked with supportive vigor. The Colonel scribbled yes somewhere, possibly on his palm, Brenda concluded. "Thank you, Miss Wright. We will form a small working group to evaluate verge policies in Q4. Meanwhile, all existing encroachments must be removed under the notices already issued." Meeting adjourned. Magnolia stared at me like a mathematician discovering an error that the chalk refuses to erase. I tipped my hat. "Good muffins," I said, and took one. "It was lemon," I nearly cackled. God writes metaphors for free. The next 10 days contained the kind of quiet most people call boring, and I call music. On day 2, the stones vanished from my inches. On day 3, a landscaper installed a dry well and redirected the French drain to daylight on her side, where I pray it will water sincerity. On day 4, a young man with a beard that tried too hard trimmed the lemon canopy back to the string line while Magnolia supervised with an expression that could sour milk. On day 5, I found a handwritten note on my porch. "Arthur, your victory lap is loud for a quiet man. Consider this my acknowledgement of the line. I read it twice and put it in the folder labeled Right Encroachment Correspondence Mild. Then I went outside and stood on my 13 inches at sunset. The strip glowed a neat green smile. Ramos's follow-up inspection was a brief sonnet. Compliance noted. On day 7, Dev stopped by with 2 peaches from his own yard and a shrug that said, "Work is work." But pins are pins. We ate them standing in the driveway like men who still know how to be delighted by fruit. Juice ran down my wrist. I didn't apologize to the shirt. On day 9, the HOA portal posted draft committee assignments for the Edible Verge Working Group. Brenda listed me as a member. I hadn't asked, but committees are where mischief rests or reveals itself. I accepted. Skylar was on it, which meant I'd hear about optics at least once a minute. I prepared a new folder. Verge Committee Q4 Bring Snacks. On day 10 at precisely 3:14 p.m., pie bless it, Magnolia walked across the strip, not to trespass, but to talk. She carried no tote, no muffins, no phone, just a lemon. She held it out like a small white flag that smelled like pastry. "For you," she said. I took it. It was warm from sun and slightly bumpy, like a planet with good weather. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. We stood there without armor for a full 30 seconds. Then she said something I did not expect. When my lease ended at the last place, my landlord said I'd made the yard too alive. She smiled crookedly. "I came here to make everything so alive that no one could ever ask me to strip it down again." I nodded. It was a human sentence. "And the line?" I asked. "The line looked like a challenge," she said. "Not a promise." We both looked at the white string. Now gone, but visible in the grass as a demarcation memory, like the mark a wedding ring leaves on a finger long after it's removed. "My wife loved this pin," I said, pointing to the tiny metal truth near our toes. She took a grainy Polaroid sitting on it, grinning like she'd personally negotiated a treaty with the earth. I think about that when people ask for inches. She's not here to say no. I am. Magnolia blew out a breath she'd been storing since the fence posts. "I'm not used to losing in public," she admitted. "Most people let me pivot until I invent a new win." "I like wins," I said, "but I like honesty more." "It lets us stop pivoting." She smiled, less rehearsed than any I'd seen on her. "You're annoyingly good at sentences." "Thank you," I said. I alphabetized my clauses. We left it there, amiable, complicated, adult. I went inside, set the lemon on June's chipped Idaho mug, and then did something only I would do. I wrote the date, "Lemon delivered post-compliance," on a sticky note, and stuck it under the fruit like a caption in a museum. The aftershocks were minor and satisfying. The committee met twice and produced a draft that did not allow encroachment, but did allow verge herb planters, within a lot line if maintained and insured by the owner. Skylar proposed a hashtag policy. I pretended not to hear it. The colonel tried to mandate flag etiquette for basil. Brenda tabled it. Ramos sent an end-of-season report that could be boiled down to 6 words. "Lines hold neighborhoods together. Enforce them." I printed it, highlighted that sentence, and slid it into my folder under a tab labeled Wisdom. I also made exactly one petty, private gesture that June would have sighed at, and then secretly applauded. I bought a small cast-iron sign shaped like a lemon wedge and staked it right on my side of the reclaimed inches. It read in modest script, "Dignity grows here, no one mentioned it." Everyone noticed it. That's the range you want. 2 weeks later, a package arrived without a return address. Inside, a jar of lemon curd. A short note written in a hand I recognized, "For your toast, not your boundary." I laughed alone and loudly, like a man who just realized his antagonist has learned the difference between compression and tension. I spread a heroic amount on an English muffin and ate it on the porch, watching the strip, which now looked like a green runway where planes practicing humility take off and land without incident. Did I win? In the narrow sense, yes. The stones are on her side. The drain minds its business. The canopy trims to the string like a penitent hat. But it's not really a win. It's something better, a retuning. The neighborhood's hum is back where it belongs. Sometimes justice arrives with sirens. Sometimes it wears linen and carries muffins. But most of the time it looks like a clipboard, a string line, a man named Dev who trusts his tripod, and a retired facilities engineer who still believes systems should hum. I'm not naive. The world is not redeemed because I kept 13 inches of grass. But I sleep differently when the inches that are mine are actually mine. And when the lemon drops a fruit on my side now and then, I pick it up, set it on the porch rail and roll it gently back toward the trunk with my shoe. Grace with boundaries. June would approve. Last Sunday, I caught Magnolia standing at the strip, looking down at the invisible line like a person reading a poem they finally understand. She didn't say anything. I didn't either. We waved with the casual respect of colleagues who have shared a difficult project and finished on time. Later, at the mailbox, the Colonel nodded at me with the fierce softness of men who don't hug. "Good show," he said again, as if he'd been waiting to repeat it in a context with even fewer witnesses. "Lines must be held." "They must," I agreed. "Or they'll hold us when we least like it." He grunted approval, then added, "Your hedges are a model citizen." "Thank you, Colonel," I said. I trained them to salute. In the evening, I sat with the Polaroid of June on the nightstand and the tiny lemon wedge sign visible from the bedroom window. I imagined telling her the whole story about the fence with aspirations, the drain that confessed, the inspection that felt like a symphony. She would say, "Arthur, you are ridiculous," and then add, "and correct." Both can be true. Marriage taught me that. So did the HOA. Before sleep took its dignified lap around the house, I wrote one last line in my notebook, a habit I've resumed because pens calm weather. I wrote, "She called it a garden. I called it evidence. We both call it Orson our side." Then I turned out the light, the lemon curd jar cooling on the counter, the neighborhood humming its familiar bureaucratic lullaby, and in that hum, if you listen closely, you'll hear the sweetest sound a quiet man knows, a string pulled tight, a line respected, a boundary that helps two people share a street without sharing a yard. Tomorrow I'll mow on Thursday. The Colonel will mow on Friday. Magnolia will plant marigolds that keep pests away from the edges. I'll bring Dev a peach when they're back in season. And if the HOA ever puts on a talent show, I will demonstrate how to laminate a plat in under 20 seconds without bubbles. People will clap because everybody likes a man who can make things lie flat. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it clicks, sometimes it stamps, sometimes it tastes like lemon on toast and the relief of a rule that kept its promise, and sometimes, best of all, it's so quiet you can hear the grass grow back where it belongs. The edible verge. Working group met on a Tuesday that smelled like copier toner and rain. We gathered in the small conference room off the clubhouse, the one with the acoustic ceiling tiles that always look like they're trying to remember math. Brenda presided with her traveling parliament of sticky notes and a binder so thick you could flatten philosophies with it. On the whiteboard she'd written in block letters, "Scope Safety Stormwater Story." I liked the last one. The first three keep you out of trouble. The fourth keeps you honest about why you're here. Present, myself, retired engineer, boundary enthusiast, committee snack realist, Skylar marketing, ring light. In his soul. Mrs. Moreno knitting, moral compass. Theo, young dad, stolar pushing optimist. And of course Magnolia linen, lemons, late breaking charm. Also seated, the Colonel at the end of the table, pen in hand, sworn enemy of ambiguity. Brenda clapped once. Not loudly, just enough to call the room to order without starting a war. "Friends," she said, "today we draft a framework. We are not deciding whether carrots deserve constitutional rights. We are deciding whether carrots can be grown within property lines without bankrupting the association or flooding anybody's crawl space." Skylar raised a hand. "Can we call this a pilot?" "Pilot tests better in community emails." "Only if pilot includes seatbelts," I said. Brenda drew a rectangle labeled Verge and split it like a cake. Private lot, HOA strip, right of way. "Rule 1, she said. "Nothing we write tonight can pretend the right of way is ours. The city owns it." "They are immune to muffins, are we sure?" Magnolia murmured, not quite joking. "Quite," Brenda said. Then circled private lot. "What neighbors do on their side, with compliance that we can shape." We went line by line, which is how adults behave when they've suffered enough from improvisation. I proposed a standard planter footprint with mandatory setbacks 12 inches from the lot line, so no one's zucchini leans into a lawsuit. Theo added a height limit. "My kid's 3. I don't want him playing hide-and-seek behind kale skyscrapers." Mrs. Moreno suggested a maintenance clause. The gardener must keep it pretty. "I do not wish to see something that looks like a laundromat lost in the jungle." "The jungle has a lobbyist," the Colonel muttered, eyeing Magnolia. Magnolia smiled real. A little tired, maybe a little warmer than last week. "I can live with setbacks," she said. "I cannot live with language that treats herbs like hazards. Words matter. If we call it encroachment in every sentence, you poison hearts before you water anything. Fair, I said. Then we'll call it placement, and reserve encroachment for when placement gets ideas. I drafted, placement shall not extend beyond recorded lot line. No hardscape or planting shall be installed that requires cross-boundary maintenance by a neighbor. Schuyler rewrote it to sound less like a plaque in a courthouse and more like something you'd say to a friend at a fence. Between us, the sentence learned manners. Stormwater, my favorite church. I drew arrows, wrote no discharge in letters tall enough to discourage creativity, and proposed a simple, idiot-proof test. If you turn it on, where does the water go? If the answer isn't onto your own dirt or an approved basin, the answer is no. Theo suggested a QR code linking to a DIY dry well guide. Schuyler vibrated with happiness. Content. We paused for snacks. I brought oatmeal cookies. Bland enough for consensus, sturdy enough for work. Magnolia slid a box across the table. Lemon bars. I felt the universe wink. Consider this diplomacy, she said. Consider this accepted, I replied, and took two. The colonel took one with the suspicion of a man who has seen espionage baked into better crusts. After sugar softened everyone's elbows, we tackled Story Brenda's word, not mine. Narrative precedes policy in this neighborhood, she said. If we frame this as finally letting our free spirits plant wherever, we lose the rule of law crowd. If we frame it as stopping chaos, we lose the artists. We need a sentence both sides can wear without itching. Mrs. Moreno looked up from her knitting. Say it like this. We want beauty and order to be friends. She returned to her needles. Brenda underlined it 3 times. In the middle of our civil architecture, the door opened and in walked Surprise, Mr. Ramos, off duty, without clipboard. He carried a paper sack. My wife sent empanadas, he said shyly. Also, I heard Stormwater and got nostalgic. We made room, as you do for a man who can end. Your deck. He listened, chewed, and contributed a single golden clause. Add this: no feature may require a neighbor to change their own maintenance to accommodate it. Keeps the blowers, mowers, and marriages from exploding. I wrote it down in block letters. For you're a poet, I said. I'm Union, he replied. We adjourned with a draft that didn't sing but hummed low, dependable. Magnolia lingered as the room emptied, gathering plates into tidy stacks like someone rehearsing contrition. Arthur, she said, you make bureaucracy feel like origami. It folds and there's a crane. Crane is better than a crowbar, I said. Then added more gently, you fought well today. On the page, not the line. She looked at the lemon bars, then at me. I still think the world needs more sharing and less measuring, she said. And I still think measuring is how we share without breaking, I answered. But I'll eat your lemon bars while we figure it out. We did not hug. We did not smirk. We stacked chairs together, the small choreography of neighbors who have survived an argument and remembered they both live here. The next odd turn arrived in the form of a letter, real paper, window envelope, city seal. Notice of proposed sidewalk improvements, Maple Lane. The city planned to grind and repour the right-of-way sidewalks in front of 6 homes, ours included. Construction in June, stakeout next week. I read it twice, then a 3rd time for dessert. Infrastructure, my old language. Beautiful and brutal. It respects nothing but plan sets and the occasional bird nest. Sidewalk work meant stakes, lasers, orange paint. Men whose one great joy is proving that physics beats charm. You could feel the neighborhood stiffen online. Schuyler posted a cry-face emoji over the words, RIP aesthetic. The colonel wrote, about time. Magnolia posted a photo of her verge with the caption, we will survive. I made coffee and a checklist. The city staking crew uses its own datum, but their stakes sing the same song as our pins. If ever there were a day to teach the block the difference between my yard and City Plan Sheet 12, this would be it. The crew rolled up at 7:02 a.m., punctual in the way only a backhoe can be. 3 workers in high-vis set tripods and argued amiably about a line that existed 6 decimals deep. Their foreman, Callahan, according to his hat, waved amiably at my mug and asked, you the guy who likes strings? I am, I said. I brought my manners. We walked the corridor. At each property, they set lath stakes, shot elevations, and scribed orange where concrete would become reality. When they reached Magnolia's verge, the tape measure performed an act of civic theater. From back of curb to right-of-way line, 48 inches. From line to her planter, the dreaded 0. Whose is this? Callahan asked, professional but not unkind. Private, I said. On private lot. It looks like the city strip because it wants attention. We'll need it out by Monday, he said, marking remove on the concrete, in a font that can move mountains and moods. Magnolia came out in a robe with a towel on her head, and a look usually reserved for plumbers who track mud. She saw the orange word and went pale in a new way. You can't, she said, trying a smile. It's community. It's trip hazard, Callahan replied. And it's in the pour zone. We pour what the plan says, or we explain to my boss why we have jazz in a march. Is there a process? She asked, overlapping charm and plea. Sure, he said. It ends with remove by Monday. He pointed to the letter she must have received. We gave you a week because we're sweethearts. She looked at me over the towel. It wasn't the glare of a week ago. So it was something closer to a request dressed as indignation. You could object, she said. I could, I said. But I won't. The plan isn't the enemy. It's the map we agree on so the sidewalk doesn't wander into fantasy. She stood there in her robe, the morning sun, making a halo of steam around her towel. Then her shoulders lowered half an inch, which on some people is surrender and on others is beginning. Fine, she said, brittle but intact. Help me then. Of course, I said, and meant it before I knew I did. We spent Saturday disassembling her verge planters like diplomats diffusing a treaty. Theo brought a dolly. Skylar brought a playlist I tolerated for democracy. The colonel supervised, calling out clearances like a flight deck. Mrs. Moreno knit on the curb and told stories that made everyone work slower but care more. Dev showed up with plywood sheets to protect the lawn, and smiling at me over the lemon tree said, Look at us, Arthur. Union of opposites. Magnolia directed with grace under demolition. Every time a board came up, she labeled it. Every time a plant came out, she triaged, keep, donate, compost. When we were done, she stood back, robe replaced by jeans, and said, It looks naked. It looks legal, I said. Legal can be beautiful. It just takes longer. She shot me a look that was not a dagger. Maybe a pea shooter. One day, she said, you'll try something impulsive. I did, I said. I got married at 23. Best illegal turn I ever took. That night, the street smelled like wet chalk and anticipation. I sat on the porch with June's Polaroid and the lemon wedge sign and thought about how often justice is nothing but work, measured, boring, necessary work performed together by people who would not have chosen each other for a dinner party. The poor day came like a drill team. Forms, rebar, concrete, float, edge, brush, cure. The sidewalk gleamed new level, righteous as a well-sung hymn. The right-of-way line reset like a metronome for feet yet unborn. We stood and admired, the way people do when the world briefly aligns with a plan. I hate how satisfying this is, Magnolia confessed, eyes on the broom finish. It's the texture, I said. Friction for bodies. We should write policy like this, slip-resistant. She smiled without resisting. Maybe we are. 2 evenings later, a ping from the portal. Compliance Review Encroachment Case ML214 is closed. Ramos had written one sentence beneath it. Boundary respected. Drainage redirected. Canopy trimmed to line. Neighbors cooperating. It read like a haiku for people who like paper. I stood on my strip and let the dusk settle on my hat. Across the way, Magnolia stepped out carrying 2 lemons. She placed one gently on the line, our line, the invisible white hum we now both hear, and rolled it toward me with her foot. It stopped on my side, our side of understanding. For your toast, she said. Not my boundary, I answered. She laughed. We were quoting the note she'd sent, but also revising it, and revision is the deepest respect you can pay a sentence or a neighbor. The colonel cleared his throat like a cannon clearing fog. Good show, he said for the 3rd time in this saga, which I took as a benediction. He pointed at the fresh sidewalk. Parade worthy? Only if the band stays in their lane, I said. Always, he replied, then added almost tenderly, Carry on, mister, and I did. I went inside, set the lemon next to June's mug, and opened my notebook to write a line I hadn't expected to earn. Justice, like sidewalks, cures best in quiet. A week later, Maple Lane held a party that wasn't called a party. Brenda labeled it a walk and talk, which in HOA dialect means lemonade, clipboards, and a discreet trash bag for bad ideas. Kids chalked constellations on the new sidewalk. Dogs signed their names to the air. The colonel wore his veteran's cap and nodded at the broom finish every time he crossed it, as if inspecting troops. Magnolia had rebuilt on her side, set back, tidy as a diagram, and somehow still generous. Where the community verge had once pretended to be a public square, she'd made an invitation you could decline. A timber bed 1 foot off the line, a rain chain that whispered into a gravel basin, herbs labeled with tiny wooden flags. At the corner, a lemon tree and a half-barrel stood like a friendly bailiff. "Welcome, but mind the court." She saw me and lifted a glass. "Taste," she said, handing over something cold and yellow with a sprig of mint. "Stormwater compliant," I sipped. "Tart, clean, honest." "A beverage with permits," I said. "Brenda made me sign a lemonade affidavit," she deadpanned, and I laughed in spite of myself. "Mr. Ramos arrived off duty and, to everyone's shock, without a clipboard." He touched the rain chain, squinted at the basin, then gave Magnolia a small thumbs up. "Flows to grade," he said. "My compliments to the gardener of record." "Joint effort," she replied, nodding toward me. He tipped an imaginary hat my way. "Just remember, if water learns a trick, call me before it performs." Across the street, Skylar took photos at angles, meant to flatter both Policy and Basil. Theo pushed his son along the chalk galaxies and explained gravity with a solemnity that made the child yawn. Mrs. Moreno presented a lemon bar to the Colonel, who accepted it like a medal. Brenda gathered us near the cul-de-sac's lone maple, which had never felt more named. "Neighbors," she began, "we learned 3 lessons. 1, carrots and bylaws can in fact share a sentence. 2, water is as political as people. 3, story matters especially when it's true." She gestured toward the fresh slab. "We pour a sidewalk once every few decades. We pour a narrative every time we open our mouths. Check your forms. Check your line." Applause light sincere, a little surprised at itself. "Arthur, say something," she added, and I made a face that meant no, and somehow produced a yes. I stepped to the edge of the new concrete and let the noise hush. June would have loved this, her neighbor heart, my surveyor spine. I lifted my glass. "To the line," I said, "the one that keeps peace from becoming permission and permission from becoming theft. To the rain that knows where to go, to the roots that stay home, to the hands that help before they argue. Hand to the best kind of justice, the kind that doesn't need a victory lap, because the sidewalk already goes where it should." Magnolia tapped her glass to mine. "And to lemons," she said, "for teaching even stubborn men about bright revisions." "Not my boundary," I answered. "Not your boundary," she echoed, smiling. Dusk came down like a patient curtain. Porch lights flicked on in a sequence that felt rehearsed. Kids dragged chalk past bedtime. Someone played a radio soft enough to make the air polite. I looked along the block and saw a series of small lawful miracles. Porches held by code-compliant posts. Roofs pitched to a plan. Hedges trimmed to letters we all signed once and keep signing. The messy grace of shared living draped over the skeleton of agreement. Before we scattered, I carried a single stake, the last unpulled lath from the pour to Magnolia's bed, and pushed it into her soil, an inch from the line. She tied a yellow ribbon around it, then wrote on the wood with a marker. "Respect, do not remove." "Sentimental," I said. "Structural," she corrected. Later, alone on my stoop, I tucked June's Polaroid beside the new letter on our fridge, case closed. 2 papers, 1 a memory, 1 a map. Between them, a lemon in a bowl, bright as a promise you can enforce. Justice didn't arrive with sirens. It showed up with strings, stakes, laughter that outlived irritation, and a sidewalk set to the right song. In a world that loves a spectacle, we chose a standard. In a street that flirted with feud, we chose the line, and then, slowly, we chose each other. I finished the last of my stormwater-compliant lemonade and set the empty glass exactly 1 inch inside my property, because I am who I am. Then I raised it anyway, to no one and everyone. "Carry on," I said to the night, and the neighborhood, like a good structure, quietly did.